Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Monday Night Therapy. I'm your host, Minnie Hunt, and I'm here with Mark Rogers from the Voice of College Football. And the reason I have Mark on tonight is because he's written a book that is so good. You guys are going to love this. Mark, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me, Minnie. I um, learned of your show this week, obviously, and thank you so much for having me. I've known John for a number of years. He's a great guy. And I was watching your open there thinking, oh, that what the therapies, is that what you Husker fans do for therapy? You like walk in cornfields. Is that it? And touch the corn? Is that
You
just kind
just,
of get yourself lost in the corn maze, I guess?
yeah, it's called Corn Talk. Yeah, you
Corn talk.
listen to the corn as it
Yeah. Okay.
talks to you.
They probably wouldn't talk to me. I'd have to introduce myself. It's probably just a natural thing for you Husker fans, but
No, no, I'm sure it would talk to you. I think it talks to most people. We want to welcome some of our chat. We have Joe Lalakis here. He says, "Hey all," and we have Fred Sacco. He says, "I like it if it says we were the rightful champs in '94 and '97." We are going to get to that because okay, guys, take a look at this. This book is called Our Disputed National Champions, and it is maybe now my 1990s Bible. I didn't know not even half of this information that's in here. It is just so chock full of Nebraska information, as well as, let's see, Florida State, Miami, Texas, you know, Oklahoma, even Colorado, all of our rivalries. So we're going to get into that. And Wade Farr is here. He says there's nothing in the field but dirt right now. Yeah, well, it's going to be there. We we know it's coming. Okay. So Mark, what made you write this book? What made you decide to write this book? Should we just
so
start there?
in addition to playing sports when I was a little kid and through high school, football, baseball, so I was kind of half jock, half nerd, I guess, because I also loved stats and rosters and doing all that sort of thing. So I'm the guy that, or the kid at the time that would write like an NFL preseason manual or would write this was a long time ago, a 16 team college football playoff proposal, like when I was in high school for an English paper, those sorts of things. So when
You're
nobody
kidding.
was thinking of a playoff back then. So
Okay.
I always love college football since I've been 8 years old, and always enjoyed kind of the structure, the organization, the history of it, and knowing that side of it as well, and having opinions on. And I guess many going back to when I was a little kid, you would watch all the big major bowl games on New Year's night, go through the Fiesta Bowl, the Rose Bowl, and the late night games would be the Orange Bowl and the Sugar Bowl. And it was funny that you'd go to bed and you didn't know who the national champion was. You'd have to wake up until the next day and pop open you'd get your morning newspaper to find out who won the national. We saw all these games, but we don't know who's going to decide what on who's the national champion. That's kind of strange. It doesn't happen like that in the Super Bowl and the World Series that somebody votes on this. And then I always wondered, I thought, why is the number one team in the country playing the number 8 team in the country?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't they be playing the number 2 team? Number 2's playing number 5, 3's playing like 17. How does this? Didn't take me long to figure out how it worked, understanding the bowl system, but I thought there's got to be a better way than this. So I've always been intrigued by, and maybe a bit of I've always kind of questioned maybe authority in the way things are decided and the way things are
Hmm.
in place, and thought, we shouldn't just take the way things are handed to us as being the best way or the truth. Maybe we should question these things.
Wow. And okay, so we're talking about early or late 80s ish, right? And so I was reading some of your bio, and it says that you first did some sportscasting. You were a three-time AP Mississippi sportscaster, and you
of the year.
did 7 year of the year, 7 years covering the SEC, right?
Yes.
And then you did 19 years working for ESPN. What made you start the Voice of College Football?
Okay, so yeah, I always wanted to be a sportscaster. It was like between sportscaster, sports writer, when I realized I'll probably never be a pro at this in terms of on the field. I don't know how old I was, but it was basically I'm going to be a sports writer. And then once I got into college, sports casting seemed a little bit more appealing, just to be able to immediately express yourself. So I was looking at those two fields. So I graduated from Kent State University.
Mm-hmm.
And immediately, within about 6 months, I don't know how many people are familiar with the broadcasting field, especially way back in those days. You couldn't just send somebody a digital, you know, just
Right.
clip of them on YouTube and you were all set. You actually had to mail tapes to stations across the country. And there would be like 500 people going for one position. So it was really a difficult field to get into. I went to school with tons of people who never broke into it, but I eventually landed a job at a small little station in Ashland, Ohio. And as a side note, which probably nobody cares about, would be that I was a newscaster and a news anchor. My first job, actually, I was covering a murder trial my first week as a 22-year-old. And I wanted no part of that. Actually, when I did a cold call at the station that hired me, WNCO. I just, knocked on the station door and just walked in and asked to talk to the general manager and the news director. And actually, they had a news opening, and I didn't know it. And I was pushing myself as I'm a sportscaster, I'm a sports guy. And they said, "Well, what do you think of news?" And I said, "Well, I despise it." and
Oh God.
then they said, "Well, we've got a news opening. We've got to need a news anchor." And then I had to backpedal and try to talk my way because I needed a job, even though I wanted to do sports. So I eventually asked them after I got the job and was there a couple months and everything was going well. I was like, "Why did you hire me after I told you that I despise news?" And they said, "Well, you read the teleprompter better than anyone else that
Oh my
auditioned."
goodness.
So there you go. So yeah, I did that for 3 years, but I got to do play by play on the side, which was
Oh, wow.
awesome. Um, high school football, basketball, Ashland
Yeah.
University football, shoot, swim meets that lasted 10 hours, just crazy thing. Just think small little podunk station out in the middle of, Ohio is kind of like Nebraska in a lot of ways,
Mm-hmm.
in the middle of nowhere in certain areas. And yeah, so we would cover anything. The first day I worked there, I covered a parade. They had me announce a parade. I'm 22 years old. I don't even know where I am, let alone who these people are or anything. And I'm announcing a parade. Um, so anyway, less on me and more on Nebraska football and the connections.
They call that baptism by fire.
Yeah, that's the way to do it.
Murder trial, parade.
Yeah.
You, you got the whole gamut there.
But
Oh my goodness.
then my next job was finally in sports, CBS station in Mississippi, WCBI. And I was the weekend sports guy and the sports reporter. And then the main guy left after about 6 months. And so I got promoted to sports director. So I'm running a sports department, which was awesome. In some ways, the best job I ever had. I'm going to Final Fours. I'm going to College World Series in Nebraska, of course. Got to go to Omaha a couple times for the College World Series. So that was fun. Man, just going to, bowl games and SEC championship games and covering three. We were probably located in Mississippi in a place that you would not have this experience anywhere else. The University of Alabama was less than an hour away. Mississippi State was 25 minutes away, and Ole Miss was 2 hours away. And because of our coverage area, nobody knew Ole Miss being 2 hours away. It was like you need to cover it. So we covered three SEC teams. So that was my life for 7 years.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Fred Sacco says Mark could have covered Nebraska since 2004 till recently. It's been a parade of murdered hopes and dreams.
Good line.
This is why we all need therapy. Okay, so you were down in Mississippi, and you obviously did a phenomenal job because you were voted AP uh, Broadcaster of the
Thank you.
Year, Mississippi. Yeah, 3 times, and you're in your 20s still.
Yes. Late
Wow.
20s by then, like 27, 28, 29 in that range. Yeah.
And then you made a switch to ESPN.
So, if anyone's familiar with local TV, it can get quite messy in regards to takeovers and that sort of thing. So, don't know that anyone wants to hear about my personal life, but I decided, this situation's, and I had a lot of job offers at different places, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Little Rock, Arkansas, etc. Anyway, but I decided to leave. I had a wife at the time and 2 little kids, and we needed to kind of do something else because things were getting a little nasty from a political standpoint at the station. Great people to work with, amazing, love those people, still talk to them to this day. So anyway, I got out of the business for like a year and a half. You talk about some stories. I was an assistant manager at Walmart for a year and a half. So I did that.
Sound like you could have been a college football coach because it seems like, they just, yeah, it's either up or down. You're nowhere in between usually.
Well, maybe I could have made better late game management, time management, clock management, strategic decisions than Scott Frost. Maybe if you want to make that comparison, I might have been able to pull that off.
We're gonna have some people who really appreciate that comment.
Okay. I didn't,
I promise you.
when I saw that look, I didn't know if that meant like, uh-oh, I said the wrong thing. I didn't think based on his record, if I would have said that like 7 years ago, I'm sure I would have gotten,
I'm the only one that defends the guy
okay.
still to this day. So,
I don't know what you're
but
defending, but
they love him, or I love him. They're like, anyways, we're not going to get into.
okay.
We don't even say his name.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
we say HC or former HCSF head coach Scott Frost. That's what they.
Okay. Well, you
That's
served
what
me a
they say.
layup on a platter there about that I could have been a college football coach. So,
Yes. Well, there you go. That's what I get for trying to help. Okay. So in 19, let's see, you must have been with ESPN then during the 90s when all of
yeah,
this AP and coaches poll and there was no national championship was taking place, correct?
I'm not quite that old, but I, so we're not going to spend an hour talking about my days at Walmart, I guess. Okay.
No.
So we'll
Is
move on
that
to,
okay? We just kind of brushed over that.
so I just left ESPN a couple years ago. So yeah, I was there for 19 years. So in terms of the 1990s, no, I spent that end of college and then into my news and sports career on the air. Yeah, so that was my 1990s. Yes,
Okay. Okay. All right.
I do. That's right. See, it's been a couple years since I actually wrote this. That's right. I was actually going to just fill this with nothing but football, but that's right. The publisher that helped me kind of self-publish this, yeah, they kind of led me to, oh, you got to put little personal anecdotes in there and kind of weave your story in there. So that's what I did. Yeah.
You did a good job,
Thank you.
mentioning that you planned to your wedding at 4 o'clock on a Saturday during football season, but you knew who the winner of the game was going to be, and it ended up not being that winner. Is that right?
Well,
Was
what
it
happened
Ohio
was,
State?
yeah, today I've lived life. I'm pretty easygoing. I understand what's important in life. If I had to miss a college football Saturday, and this may not endear myself to your audience, but I would be fine. I'd be okay. I'll live. I'll be okay. But back then, oh my goodness, NFL 1 p.m. Eastern time on Sunday, Saturday was reserved for college football and all that. So when my wife to be wanted to infringe upon college football season with our wedding, I at least made the move that, okay, as soon as the Ohio State schedule came out and they were kicking off at noon, well, then we need to move the start of our service late enough that the entire game's going to be cleared out of the way. That was the compromise.
Oh my goodness. I love that actually. That's a great story. I do. I often wonder why anybody would schedule anything during college football season. I
Yeah,
mean, it's such a short amount of time. Why take up those Saturdays?
I know. It's the most precious sport. It's the longest off season. We only get 12 games. Absolutely. Right there with you.
Okay, so I asked you why you wanted to start the Voice of College Football, and I think you were getting there.
Yeah, I was getting there. Okay. So I'm at ESPN. I'm a production operations manager. Great place to work. Great place to work, except for at the end. So we won't get into that. But yeah, phenomenal people and all of that. So I missed being on the air. I was obviously a manager, so that was a great job and everything, but I missed being on the air. So at one point, this is like 2009, ESPN was starting its digital platform. They had a website and everything, but they were starting to do digital media. And nobody watched it. Nobody cared back then. YouTube was like 2 or 3 years old. And so somebody who I still haven't found out told the person in charge of digital media at ESPN, you need to go talk to this Mark Rogers guy because he would be really good to put on here. And so he contacted me. He had me audition. He had me send in my resume stuff that was ancient at that point, but had me audition. And he's like, yeah, I would like to have you on to do, anchoring and so forth and highlights and so forth. So they started having me come in to do, well, back then, didn't take them long to figure out it was more cost effective to actually just take Sports Center highlights and put them on ESPN.com. Why not just take, the Angels Yankees game highlights from Sports Center, just put it, but back then we would produce a whole other
Oh,
set of highlights for the NHL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, of course, college football on Saturday. And so I just sat there all day. And so they paid me a freelance salary in addition to my job over here, freelance salary to come in and just voice highlights and anchor little shows on the internet on ESPN.com. And so they would just feed me, little sheets of paper, if you're familiar, called shot sheets. Like a shot sheet just basically says, first quarter, Nebraska leads 3-0. Dylan Raiola touchdown pass to Jalen Brown,
yeah.
47 yards. And then you embellish based on your, whatever little catchphrases and what your style is. But it's just the shot sheet just basically says what's coming each shot.
Okay.
And so I would just cut highlights, go into an audio booth and just cut highlights. And then I would do anchor lead-ins that would be on. And so they would use these, and it was a cool little gig to have on the side. The
Yeah.
problem was I had this like full-time manager's job, and they kind of conflicted. And so I typically would have to turn
At
them
Walmart.
down when they would call me in to do this.
Oh,
And,
okay.
and so at some point, my buddy Marty McFadden, I thank him all the time on my show. About once a year, especially, give him a big salute because he's the guy that got me rolling. So he said, Mark, because I was like frustrated because I'm like, there's like 11 straight times that I've had to turn them down. They want me to come in. I can make an extra $300 for just 4 or 5 hours of work of doing highlights and doing what I love to do, but I got to turn them down because I got to work. My regular job's getting in the way. He's like, Mark, why don't you start your own YouTube channel? And I said, well, I never really thought of that.
Yes.
And so that was like 2011 that I started my own YouTube channel. And You'll learn this one day, Minnie, because well, you've been at this 15 months, but they have this option when you go on somebody's YouTube channel, you can look at their most popular videos, you can look at their oldest videos,
Yes,
oldest live streams, and you can kind of reverse the whole channel and see from the
yes,
beginning. And so people can laugh at you and be like, now I was a pretty experienced broadcaster at that point. So um, I was probably better actually on YouTube then than I am now. But so I got started because he's like, start your own YouTube channel.
sure.
Yeah.
That is so awesome. What a good friend. And so you've been at this since 2011, and I found you almost immediately when I joined YouTube to start watching. I think it was like 2019. I started watching YouTube more for the, you know, the post game press conferences,
Okay.
but I also love the live reactions from people. Um, so
And you
you've been
never
doing this a
commented.
long. I haven't.
From what I can remember. I'm just not that I remember every comment from everyone, but we were just talking before
Yeah.
we started to do the live show that there are so few females that watch
Mm.
these football shows and comment. They usually stand out a little bit. So,
I'm not gonna lie. As a female watching, even in the comments, with mainly guys, and these guys typically know each other, it's hard to insert yourself. Some girls can do it pretty easily, but you just need to kind of be more in tune with the same thing that
yeah.
they are. And I'm a newer fan. Anyways, I only started being a fan since 2016. So compared to these guys, I hard for me to contribute. You know what I mean? But they're gracious enough to let me join their club.
I never thought of it that way because I guess I never showed up on anybody's show and started watching and tried to be part of the. I've always had it from come at it from
Yeah.
this side, from in front of the
Yeah.
camera. I have never taken part in anybody's chat or
Oh,
done
it's
that.
the most fun. That is the most fun. That's why I'm here. Because it's such a great community of people that have the same, wants that you want your team to win, and they're down in the dumps with you whenever they don't win, and it's like, yeah, it's therapy. So it's I
If you
love it.
can't find any corn, I guess it's some therapy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So to I recently, once I got your book, I read that the AP poll and the coaches poll used to make the decisions for basically who was the national champion in college
absolutely.
football. I heard stories of this, but I didn't really understand it. How is that even a thing? How is that even possible? You leave it up to just people voting? And the AP poll had more significance than the coaches poll. Is that right? Or were they about equal?
Looking back at it now, when people reference poll history, they almost always go to the AP. But at the time, if the coaches, and when we say coaches, we'll put that in quotes because the actual coaches would vote when they wanted to. See, when I was in Mississippi working with these coaches all the time, interviewing them and so forth, and they were all amazing. I'd walk on the practice field and they in the middle of practice, they do interviews and stuff. But anyway, that aside, I learned from working with these sports information departments that they were the ones who filled in the ballots for the coaches, who filled in the top 25 for the coaches. Like the
Oh,
coaches didn't want to be bothered with that. The coaches usually had some kind of grudge or something like that that needed to be
sure.
inserted to say, okay, you feel that I don't care if where Clemson's ranked or I don't care where Penn State's ranked, but keep our rival down, knock them down 5 spots. They get instructions on a couple teams, or maybe lift our rival up because we're playing them in 2 weeks or
Oh,
whatever. But the SID, the sports information director, they would fill out for the coach the top 25 again, except for those couple teams that they cared about.
okay. I just think that is so unscientific.
Oh, well, yeah, it's unscientific. Uh,
It's
yeah.
it's so biased. It's unreal because psychology also plays a part in this. If you
Oh,
happen to be ranked high on a poll, your expectation level for your entire team is just, we're going to win this, and you go in and you play better. That's just how psychology works. But
okay.
if you're never mentioned, like these days, it feels like Nebraska's almost never mentioned. We're just fighting and clawing our way for everything we get. And sometimes I think it's good that we're not mentioned because there's not a whole. I want to be one of those like sleeper teams that just takes over the sport. That, that's what we need. But
You're getting
yeah,
there.
yeah, I hope so. I hope so. But I found it fascinating the story that you told about the chains not being moved in the 19, what was it,
1990.
1990 game,
Yeah.
the Colorado versus Mizzou game.
Hmm.
I think I do you want to just refresh everyone's memory about that?
Yeah. So Colorado eventually won half of a national championship because they won the, I don't remember which it was. They won one of the two, the AP or the coaches poll at the end of the season. Georgia Tech was the other national champion. So they're playing a game at Missouri. It's late in the season. They're down by 5 points, let's say, and they're driving and they get inside the 5 yard line. And after one of the plays, there was some confusion after the play, and the officials forgot to flip the down marker to the next down. So they played a whole other down without, so they got an extra down. So what's really confusing about it is if they would have been stopped on what should have been fourth down and then scored on fifth down, which is what happened, then you could say, well, they don't deserve to win. We should nullify that after the fact because they scored on fifth down. They got stopped on fourth down, but they spiked the ball, which was a new rule. It was the first year of where you could spike the ball to stop the clock and kill a down. And so, but they would not most likely have chosen to do that if they knew what the correct down was. They wouldn't have done that because they didn't have the down to spare. So it's kind of this, well, we don't know what would have happened. And there was this just melee after the game. Like they just kind of held everybody suspended, and the officials went off into a corner and talked it through. And just all they could say is they won the game, even though that we know that they scored on a fifth down. And I guess the announce, this was back when not every game was on ESPN
Mhm.
or a major network. It's a bit shoddy. They didn't even realize until after. Then they were like, "Oh yeah, first play was he ran for 2 yards, and then this happened, and this. Oh, they
Yeah.
got 5 plays."
Oh my goodness. Well, and the fact that they were behind
Yeah,
before this took place, it just is like, wait a second, who really should be national champion?
yeah. This didn't happen like in the middle of the second quarter. This was the end of the game. There was like 3 seconds left in the game when they scored the game-winning touchdown. The game was over. They scored on the last play of the game to win. So yeah, it's pretty fascinating.
So then something similar happened in 91 where the two top teams never played each other. Is that correct?
Correct.
So you have two top teams that have the best records that never play each other. So you don't know who's better. That just sounds insane.
Well, these teams had their bowl designations based on what conference they played in. So Washington was 11-0. So they went to the Rose Bowl as the
Okay.
Pac-10 champion, and Miami, they actually didn't have a conference affiliation with a bowl, but they ended up going to the Orange Bowl. Um, and they played
Okay.
Nebraska.
Oh.
1991, yeah, they played Nebraska. And things didn't go too well for Nebraska back in that time frame when they would play Miami and Florida State in bowl games. But then they got their act together and they figured some things out, which I think is quite fascinating, what Tom Osborne was able to do. But yeah, these two teams had great just really flooded the NFL draft with a ton of great players. They were dominant, but Washington and Miami, they never played, and they both went 12-0, so they split the national championship.
It just doesn't feel real. You can't have like one, like on our stadium, we have how many national championships we have. How would you do like one half? Would you do like 0.5 or how would you do that?
Well, Nebraska technically has one of a lot of teams have those, but Nebraska has the last one, 1997.
1997. Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
I did read that. One thing I liked about your book is that you put in here, okay, this is what it would look like if these teams played today. This is, and in the first, I think it was the first year, 1990, you didn't even have Nebraska playing against anybody.
Well, okay. So when I line up the bowl games in each one of these years, I didn't want to make it super confusing because there's like 26 bowl games at the time.
Yeah. Okay.
I just list the games that impacted the national championship, the bowl games that impacted the national championship.
I see. I see. Okay. Okay. So, yeah, and like you said, Nebraska was in 1990, Nebraska was like ranked at 19. And they ended up playing like the first or second,
Yes.
right?
So we said that Colorado won half the national championship. Georgia Tech won the other, even though
Yeah.
Colorado lost a game and tied a game. And that doesn't even count the other game that they really lost. They really lost two games and tied a game. And Georgia Tech just tied a game. They didn't have any losses, but they split one of the polls voted for Colorado to win the national championship. Yeah, Georgia Tech won half the national championship after they beat Nebraska in the Citrus Bowl. And yes, Nebraska was, what were they ranked? Yeah, like 19th in the country.
Yeah.
I think they were higher than that, something like that. They were in the teens. Yeah,
Well,
at the time.
we,
Yeah. Because this is what happened then, Minnie, is there were certain conference affiliations so for example, Nebraska was in the Big 8 at the time. If you won the Big 8, you automatically went to the Orange Bowl.
okay.
But there were some open spots, like the opponent in the Orange Bowl was not affiliated to a conference. So the bowl would go out and not necessarily get the best team to play the Big 8 champion. They would get the team that would get the best TV ratings and would bring the most people to the game. That's what they cared about more than we need to get the best team. We need to get the best draw.
I see.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, one of the other things that you pointed out was in the AP polls and the
You have a
coaches
good memory,
poll.
by the way. I'm sorry to cut you off. Nebraska was number
No,
19. Yes.
well, because I'm shocked. What? We were 19th. Okay.
In 1984, BYU won a national championship. They didn't play any ranked teams, and the team that they played in their bowl game was 6-6, and they won the national championship. They were number one in the country, and they played an unranked team in their bowl game.
Wow. Yeah. I don't even know what to say. I'm so glad things have changed. And I want to get your opinion on if you like the way things have changed later. But before I do, I wanted to point out I loved how you said that the AP poll and the coaches poll at the beginning of the season, basically they just took whoever was at the top from the last season and just moved it over. This is who's top for this season
Did
at the
I say
very
that?
beginning. You did say it.
Okay.
Do you not agree with that now?
I don't know what point I was trying to make there. I'm not saying I didn't say that. Yeah, I'm just trying to recall exactly what my point was. Um, One of the major points I was trying to make in this book, and I don't even know if I explained it in this book. So, Minnie, I got an education on this when I worked in Mississippi at the CBS station, because this is what my Saturdays would look like. Let's say I was going to the Alabama LSU game and they were playing at 2:30 in the afternoon. You guys know a lot about 2:30 starts in Central Time. I lived East Coast time, but Central Time, yeah, 2:30, a lot of kickoffs at 2:30. So me and my cameraman, we had like an hour drive. We'd want to have dinner at the stadium before, da 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 da. So the games kicked off at 11 a.m., the national games. That was the start of the college football day. We had to leave before that to load up the gear and everything that we needed. So you're driving, you're at the stadium. Yeah, there are TVs on with, there's the Ohio State Purdue game, and there's the Kansas State Oklahoma State game, etc. And you're catching a little bit here and there, but you're getting prepared to cover the game. And whether you're in the press box or on the field, then you cover this Alabama LSU game that lasts 3.5 hours. Then after the game's over, you go into the locker room, you interview players, you go to the coach's news conference, you do that, and then you load up your gear, and it's 2:30. Football game's over at 6. It's like 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. You drive all the way back to the station. And I'm sure things are done much different now because they probably just digitally send it back. But then you're editing tape, you're putting your stories together for the 10 o'clock news or the 11 o'clock news. That's your entire day. All you've lived is Alabama and LSU. You have no idea what's going on in college football other than hearing a score over the PA system and that sort of thing. And even with the internet now, you have to be focused on your job. So I was a college football nut, so I would kind of catch up on Sunday and during the week. But I noticed in rubbing elbows with these AP writers who had votes for the national championship in the poll, if you're an AP writer and you work for the Clarion Ledger in Jackson, Mississippi, and you're covering Ole Miss football, you don't care what's going on in the Big Ten. That's not your job. Your job is to know that the left guard for Ole Miss sprained his ankle in the last game, and that all the minutia of Ole Miss football. That's your job. So they didn't know what was going on in the rest of the country, and they had more power than anyone to vote the rankings. And I knew from rubbing shoulders with these guys, they're at their game the entire day. They're at the Ole Miss LSU game the entire day. They haven't seen any other college football. And during the week, it's not their job to know college football. It's their job to know Ole Miss football. And it was obvious going to news conferences with these guys and talking college football. They don't know anything else that's going on across the country.
Wow. That makes perfect sense. I understand exactly what you're saying. So these guys were just kind of like throwing darts at a dartboard.
Yeah.
And going off of statistics from the previous season and what they heard.
What they
What they
heard
thought.
and who's
Yeah.
supposed to be good.
Yeah.
The same teams are supposed to be good. So
Dang. Wow. I am okay. All right. So we moved on to 93, 94, 94 especially because that's one of the years. And I love how you guys really highlighted the Huskers in this book. I mean, you gave a great tribute to Tom Osborne and the teams of the 90s that came through Nebraska. I think I think it was you who said the 1995 team was the best team you've ever seen in college football.
they're the most dominant team I've ever seen. And I'll put it this way. Every team since that 1995 team has either lost a game during the season, not gone undefeated, or even if they went undefeated, they were seriously challenged. Like they got a little lucky, they pulled a game out, something happened, they got some breaks. That team just blasted through everyone. The closest game they had, they won by 2 touchdowns, and the game wasn't that close. I've looked up the game, looked at the they were up by a lot more than that and just kind of cruised home. They annihilated everybody.
So this is what the stories sound like when I hear them from these guys in chat. They're like, yes, that's what we're used to. Are we ever going to get back to that? And honestly, I had nothing to really compare it to. I have some memorabilia, but I don't have stories. I don't have real, like, I lived it type stories. And I love reading that because you're so entrenched in like the storytelling of it. You did a great job. Um, I noticed that the NCAA had a lot of power back then because they seemed to be throwing around lots of probations that disqualified teams completely. I mean, they can't do that now. Why was it so different then? Nobody challenged them?
Well, now we've got money free flowing in the sport and it's above board. So that's one action that really took power away from them. It was much more of an amateur sport, or at least it was supposed to be, and it was out in the open, much more
Mm-hmm.
of an amateur sport. But yeah, the NCAA, yeah, they ran the sport. I I have said over the last few years that the great indicator in this sport, the event that showed the real power in the sport and how the sport's run was, I don't think anyone's ever going to be able to, was the pandemic, was the COVID year. When the
Oh.
COVID hit, then it was all like, what do we do? Is this safe? What's going to happen? Who's going to, well, all these conferences did whatever they wanted to do. The NCAA had no control over them. The
Mm-hmm.
SEC said, we are playing football. We'll figure it out. We'll make sure it's safe, but we are playing football. The Pac-12 ran the other way and said, nope, this is crazy and this is out of control and we can't play and we're not playing. And they decided the exact opposite. The Big 12 and the ACC basically did what the SEC kind of like waited for their cue and then said, oh, well, if the SEC is doing that, we're going to do that. The Big 10 was the fascinating one because there was this great divide between the passion of the coaches and players and the fans to play and say, let's figure this out. Let's do all the safety things we need to do, but
Yeah.
we're playing football. And much like the SEC, but the academic types, the administrators, they were shut it down. So there was a big fight in the Big 10. But it showed that the NCAA had nothing to, these conferences did exactly what they wanted to do.
So that was basically, in your mind, the end of the NCAA
Well,
in college football as we knew it.
it certainly showed their deterioration. It was the event that really showed, okay, push comes to shove, who makes the decisions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And today I noticed that you made a statement which was bold in my mind because I haven't heard anyone just say it quite like that, even though I've thought it. I think we all have. Um, and that was that the Big Ten and SEC are the ones with the power. They're basically going to be not asking for this to happen in the future. They're going to be telling ESPN, the college football playoffs, this is how we would like it and this is how it's going to take place. Pretty
Yeah, I
bold.
truly believe that. I think our indicator there was about a year ago. Well, I think we've been heading this way in a long time because all you have to do is look at TV ratings. And I do a TV rating series every off season. and run through all the TV ratings and compile them and divide them by teams and conferences to show who's drawing the most viewers and who's the most popular. Well, the SEC and the Big Ten are by far, it's not even close. They draw the most rear ends to the, I guess, eyeballs to the rear ends in the seats in the stadiums, eyeballs watching the games. And so they have the power. They have the most popular brands. And so they are making ESPN and Fox, Disney, the most money. So they have the power in the sport. For the first time ever, Minnie, the Big 12, the ACC, the Pac-12 when it existed, the Big 10 and the SEC, everything that they've always done was an equal split. All this bowl system, all the money, TV contract, it's always been in evens postseason, always been an even split until this last playoff contract when the SEC and the Big 10 said, no, we are each taking 29% and you guys get, it's like 12% and 11%.
Wow.
Because we've run the numbers and we generate, each of us, basically a third of it, and you guys get much less.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, I think given that football is now a business, you have
Yeah.
to look at it from a business standpoint.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we don't like that necessarily, but
I don't either.
okay. So that's what I wanted to ask you. We kind of have brushed over the 90s. There's been quite a few disputed champions, as you pointed out in your book.
I think
Unbelievable
all of them
amount.
are disputed myself,
Yes,
but
that's what I can't believe it. They really are. Because you start out with a system that's so flawed. And even though the commissioner of the SEC wanted to start having a championship, it still was flawed in that, the SEC wasn't as dominant even then as they are now. Um, I don't know. I just think that it shows how the team or how college football playoffs have evolved, and is it good the way that they've evolved? Most people would say no. We want less teams in the playoffs, right? But given where we started,
how many teams would you like in the playoffs?
I mean, it's hard to say. I don't want to watch this many games though. It's a lot of games, and most of the games don't really seem relevant. I'm not claiming to be, I'm just like a casual fan. That's all I can take from what we saw last season. Of course, I'll take whatever they give me. Um, but I'm just curious you've been doing this a long time. What would you like to see?
Well, I think it's more interesting maybe because I have to process my own thoughts every day. So I'm bored to hear what I have to say because I say it every day. I'm curious because you're a Nebraska fan. So you're a fairly new fan, 2016. It's going on 10 years, but you're a Nebraska fan. So sorry to say this, your team has been
Horrible.
nationally.
Irrelevant. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. You don't have
I
to
don't like to
apologize.
say irrelevant because Nebraska is such a powerful brand and the history and everything will make you always, in some ways, not irrelevant, but on the field, you've been irrelevant. How much of the playoffs did you watch last year? Since your
A
team is
lot.
completely not even close,
Yeah.
not
Well,
even, yeah.
I watched probably half,
Okay.
which is a lot, probably more than I've watched in previous years.
Did you
Um,
watch just based on convenience? Like, oh, I'm home now, I'll watch, but the next week I got better things to do? Or were there certain teams that you thought, or games
yeah,
that you thought this can be a better game?
that's what it was.
Yeah.
There were too many blowouts. in my mind.
Yeah.
That kind of stopped me from watching more of the games. So I don't
Yeah.
know. Vince Watson says 8.
Oh, see, that's
8
a
sounds like a good
great.
number.
I think I've seen Vince possibly in the past. Anyway, I like 8. So we were at. Can I do a little quick sales pitch real quick just to
Please,
let
I
people
want
know one
to.
thing about this book? Is that it sounds like a history book, but Minnie started to allude to I didn't want to write a history book, even though I love history. I love sports history, football history. I knew that a lot of people are like, that's dead, that's gone, doesn't matter. So yeah, I take each one of these seasons and take all the results, and then I put them into all of the following systems and formulas, the BCS that started in 1998, then the 14 playoff, and the 12-team playoff that we have now, and then what is being proposed, the 14-team playoff. So Minnie, that's a great response by Vince. I'm right there with Vince, and on record many times of saying, so we were at just 2 teams playing a BCS championship game through 2013, and then it got expanded to 4. And when people asked me, did they get it right, Mark? Is this the way they should be doing it now? My response was, well, having 4 teams with the opportunity to win a national championship that have deserving resumes, that's a step in the right direction. But we got 5 conferences. Why do we have 4 spots? We still didn't get it right. So that's why I like 8. I like 8 because right now we have buys because we got
Mhm.
12 teams. So some teams get buys. And this isn't the NFL. The NFL, you earn your buy. Um, Everyone plays each other so you can fairly evaluate the teams. And there's not even an evaluation. It's just if you win your division, you get the best record, you get a buy. You can't do that in college football because nobody plays each other across these conferences, hardly ever. So we got to rely on humans, a committee to say, well, those are the teams that get the buys. Don't like that. So I don't like buys. So 8 removes the buys because I've
Mhm.
always said there's 2 unfair things about buys. Number one, the obvious, you get an automatic, free pass to the next round. But also the team that has to play in the first round that eventually wins that game, you get to sit for weeks and scout those 2 teams that are playing in the first round if you get the bye. And so you get to concentrate and scout them while
True.
they have to focus on their first opponent. They can't focus on you. They have to focus on their first opponent, win the game, and then play. So buys, yeah, I don't agree with that. So the 8 covers the 5 conferences, what used to be 5, now it's 4. And then it allows for the best teams remaining to also be included. I like 8.
There's a lot of people who agree with you, Vince Watson, Highlander Gun. 8 is circular. That's good. Husker Chuck says 8 equals hachi. I'm not sure. And then I like Joe LaLakis' comment. He says, as long as there is no Notre Dame clause.
Oh, don't get me started on Notre Dame. They should be in a conference.
I get started, please.
Be in a
You
conference.
are you are in amongst friends here.
So here's the deal with Notre Dame. I don't blame Notre Dame. And every time I go on a rant about Notre Dame fans come after me. I did jump in a chat. It's funny, Minnie, because I said I never jump in chats, but there's a guy that's got a Notre Dame channel. And I don't know if your YouTube is like this, but when I flip open my laptop, it shows me all the various, it's obviously drawing you in to try to choose something. And I saw that there was this Notre Dame show on, and I've had this guy on my show before. I've been on his show. I jump in the chat as soon as I made one comment. Oh my word! I had Notre Dame. I thought I could just go in there anonymously and like people wouldn't recognize that I'm making comments with everyone else. I make one comment. I got all this. This guy hates Notre Dame and his show sucks and all these Notre Dame fans coming after me. And then other Notre Dame fans were like, no, he's cool. He knows what he's talking. So I caused this little fight. But
Hmm.
I've made it very clear. I don't blame Notre Dame. They're going
Yeah.
to do what's in their best interest. I don't blame them. I blame that they're not being held accountable. And it's funny that we're talking about the 1990s, Minnie, because if we went back to the early 1990s, you know who else was an independent?
Miami.
Florida State, Miami, Louisville, Syracuse, Penn State, West Virginia, South Carolina.
Oh my
We
goodness.
could go on and on with how many independents there were. Then Boston College, there were a zillion of them. Well, now we're down to one. So join a conference. You need to be treated like everybody else.
I love that.
Yeah.
Maybe you should run for a commissioner of some sort.
Well, I would enjoy that generally, I think, as long as, taking a position like that, the key is you surround yourself with people smarter than you.
That's true. You need to, but I think it's also really important to have the history under your belt, so to speak, so that you can not go back and make those same mistakes, right? Because history repeats itself, and it just seems like, we didn't want teams paying players under the table. So we made it legal. And now, as I commented today on your show, it seems like it's more just about who has the most money, has the best team. I mean, Ohio State said that they had a $20 million roster. Well, come to find out, they actually had more. Is that what college football has amounted to?
Yeah. And
You
sorry, I don't have a
say
better
yes.
answer for you than to agree. You're right. You've nailed it. Now, so it's going to be, you have to have the money to win, but that's not going to guarantee. You have to be smart with the money. So because Texas had great recruiting from the time Mac Brown left in roughly 2010 all the way up until a couple of years ago, and they sucked every year because they didn't know what they were doing. So you need to have both, but you can't win without money these days. So you have to have the money and then manage it well. So yeah, we're going to be down to about 10 or 12 schools that really run the sport.
Which you pointed out eliminates Big 12 competition, ACC competition from national championships, more than likely, 99.9% chance. Fred Sacco says now they pay them over the table with zero guardrails and zero incentives for players, zero pay for performance. It's a you know what model. It
So,
it needs to have some guardrails for sure. He's right about that.
and the difficult place. So talk about a history lesson. I'll say this very briefly. The overarching issue with this entire sport is that it started off as an amateur sport, student athletes. It wasn't even a really competitive sport. It was competitive for the people on the field, but it was a club sport. The first official season of college football is 1869. So do you think
Yeah.
anybody was making money or selling tickets to games? No, it was a club sport. And then it just evolved. It evolved and then it started to gain in popularity. And then, anytime something evolves, then other people get involved to say, well, I want to have a better team than their team. So let's get this guy and these dudes to play on our team and move them from that school to this. And then you introduce money and then everything changes. And so, of course, they were making some money by selling tickets to games, but that was minuscule compared to boom, becomes the 1950s and you introduce television and then you start to make a lot of money. And then so you have this model that's completely based on amateurism So the model of the sport is based on amateurism. You have to go to class, you have to pass tests, you have to actually be a student. But then you've got this money that's growing, 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 growing. That's uh, and we know money's just a tool. It can be used for good, it can be used for evil. So, but you got two conflicting things. So this is the way. This is where I think we've finally gotten to this tension point in the way both of these have evolved. Is the system and the model for this sport has always been a student athlete model, but money has become the dominant force and it's become a business.
I do not envy head coaches these days
Oh,
at
I
all.
don't either.
And what a pain in the neck. No wonder there's coaches. I mean, you mentioned this. There's only 3 coaches right now in college football who have won national championships. And who are the other, top college football coaches? Will we ever really know? Because they've made such a nightmare for people to even want this job. It's
Yep.
so difficult to coach.
Yeah. We've had 3 coaches that come to mind. We would have never seen this before, where a coach is the head coach at a place like UCLA that says, you know what, I don't want to be a head coach anymore. I'll go be an offensive coordinator at Ohio State. The head coach at UCF, no, thank you. I'll be an offensive coordinator at Florida State, where I can just go back to coaching
Mm-hmm.
X's and O's, coaching players, calling plays, and be a coach and not be the CEO of this massive thing where we got to figure out how we keep players and go get players and what's our NIL and who's, you know, do we have to, you know, who do we have to please out there to get more money?
It's a tough job, but with everyone in college football, I didn't say this because obviously I have a bias. I believe Matt Rule is the guy to get all of that taken care of, as well as the coaching part taken care of. I think that he just has such a mind for being able to do all of the stuff that's required. And he's able to bring, I mean, we were one of the first to stop doing the spring game. We were the first. And for a good reason. It's perfect. It makes perfect sense. Am I brokenhearted? Yes. I would love to see a spring game, but I understand because it's not good for our team. And to be able to articulate it like that, where fans can be like, okay, I get it, and not be angry, he's one of a kind.
So I went to Big Ten Media Days the last 2 years. And so the first time was after, no, he had just gotten the job. So the first time was going into the 2023 season. And I tell you, if you want to hear somebody who is buttoned up and can give a speech from a podium and says all the politically correct things, then PJ Fleck's your guy at Minnesota. If you want to see other guys that kind of go off the rails, then you get a few other candidates. But if you want a great combination of a dude who can just communicate, who can just look you in the eye or speak to a large audience, and it's this great balance of you don't feel like he's a salesman. He's not that polished to that degree. He feels like a real human being, but he's also just a great storyteller and he
Mhm.
explains things so well. And he's so, I came away from Big Ten Media Days those 2 years more impressed with Matt Rule than anybody.
Wow, that says a lot. That says a lot. And Orson Adolph says Mike Leach was that man. That's what I'm talking about, though. Are we ever going to get to see a Mike Leach again? Because of the way that college football has become this huge business where you have to wear so many different hats and be torn. So you get into it, right? You get into college football coaching because you love coaching. You want to make a difference in players' lives. And then you get pulled in all these other directions. Are
It's
we ever
almost
going to
like being a
see one
politician.
Yeah.
I think there are politicians out there that actually had an honest intent originally, like I can change things and I can get in there and do good, but then they get churned up in the system and they got to start making deals and compromising and yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to take a couple of these comments that I have starred throughout this conversation. Fred Sacco says, I did the same in college. And he was talking about how you wrote a paper about how we should have a 16 team playoff. I did the same in college in a debate class. I wrote how undefeated 1993 Auburn was a joke in Paper Tiger. And I didn't realize my professor was an alum. I got a C on that one.
You got to know your audience.
That's the key right there. And then James Boardman says, you're lucky. It could be worse. I have a face for radio and a voice for Morse code. I can't remember what he's saying that to, but something about being in Mississippi. I don't remember.
I might have turned out to be a play-by-play guy, but I didn't think I had the voice for that. I didn't have the pipes for it. But that's what I did for 3 years is when I got out of college is do play-by-play. I enjoyed that. Yeah.
You really enjoyed it?
Yeah.
So does there's the guy that I work with on Thursday nights. That's how he started. Was he did the play-by-plays in a little town in Shadron, Nebraska, same as you, like for high school sports. So I think that's really interesting. I don't know if I could ever really do that. You have to be really quick, like quick-minded. Yeah. But you enjoyed it.
Yeah, I did like it. Yep.
Jola Lakis says, was Mark at the 93 TSU Nebraska game where the field experienced a few geometric discrepancies? What is he talking about?
1993 Penn State Nebraska game. I don't know. So 1994 obviously was when both teams went undefeated, and there was a controversy about that.
Oh, okay.
But 1993, so Nebraska wasn't in the Big Ten. I don't think
Yeah.
they played in they played in 1983.
Oh, maybe that's what he was thinking.
I know what he's talking about.
Yeah, I bet that's what
No,
he's talking about.
I was not there. I was in junior high, but I was not there in 1983. Yeah. But I know what game he's talking about. It's on CBS. I remember. Yes.
Oh, really? What are the geometric discrepancies that he's talking about? What does that have?
There was a late touchdown pass that Penn State won. I don't remember the specifics of what was involved there. Sorry, I don't remember everything.
That's okay. You seem to. I was amazed at how much you could recall just like that during your show today, your live show. I'm like, how do you walk around with that much knowledge in your head? Like you could just recall, oh yeah, that was the year that they went 10-2 or whatever. Wow. I can't even remember what we did last season, hardly. Okay. Wade Farr says, why do announcers like an ESP on ESPN, some are there forever and some last only a season?
Well, they're evaluated at the end of the season. They have contracts. If he's talking about the actual play-by-play announcers, they get evaluated and they're under contract. And a lot of them that have less pull obviously are working on just 1-year contracts.
I see. Okay. Okay. Then Fred Sacco says in 1997, Nebraska would have killed Michigan. They did several computer simulations, and the average margin of victory was 17 points. Vegas had us winning in hypothetical 2. 97. Yeah, but isn't Michigan the most winningest team?
Michigan is the most wins all time. Yes.
Yeah.
Ohio State is the best winning percentage of all time.
actually makes me feel really good that they're part of the Big Ten, if for nothing else.
Yes, you, unlike most of your audience, just know of Nebraska being in the Big Ten. I'm sure you
Hmm.
have heard all sorts of conversation and so forth about, was it good for Nebraska to join the Big Ten or
Oh
not?
yeah. Oh yeah. Most people say no. Okay, you kind of seem like you have a little smirk on your face, like you
Well, I
knew the
always have
answer to
an
that
opinion
question.
on things. I
Well,
I don't think there's any question financially it was a good move. I don't know that it was a good move for the football program in regards to success. Seemed to
yeah,
mark the downturn of the program,
yeah,
competing in a tougher conference and kind of drawing them away from their roots. This is another issue I have with the way college football has gone over the last 10 or 15 years is I don't know if you feel the same way, Minnie, but one of the great draws to college football is it's a reflection of America. Like the
oh, I do.
South has a certain style. They
Hmm.
like certain music, certain food, they talk a certain way, all that. The Midwest, same thing. The East Coast, a certain way. The West Coast, a certain way. Texas is like you have a fabric to the country and different regions in the country. And the Big Ten reflected who they were and the SEC. And now, well, the Big Ten's coast to coast. Once you draw in California schools and Oregon schools and New York schools, and it's they're all just all over the place. When I think Big 12, that's Oklahoma and Nebraska and it's Kansas and Kansas State. It's basically the plains. It's the Dust Bowl or it's that region of the country. Well, now UCF's in Orlando. They're in the Big 12 in Arizona and Arizona State, and everybody's all over the place. And it's completely ripped apart the fabric of the sport and the regionality of the sport.
Hmm. That is really another story for another book. I hear a story there, and but you did touch on something there. That is the reason why I am a Nebraska fan, right there. To me, Nebraska football is a slice of Americana, and I just love that. And I was just talking with this about to Greg because I was so excited to have you on, and I was running some ideas past him, and I said that um, one of the things that this book does, as well as what our chat brings to this show, is that sense of nostalgia that is so ingrained in Nebraska football. And I think if it wasn't for nostalgia for Nebraska football, that very likely that this program would have died.
Well, that's the one thing that Nebraska fans can be extremely proud of. And that's so impressive that when other major brands have tanked for a period of time, whether that's Texas, whether that's Florida State, fill in the blank, the fervor, the passion that's reflected in the attendance goes down. USC, shoot, they're in LA. They'll go to baseball games or Lakers games or go to the beach. But at Nebraska, it's now you bring up somebody like Ohio. I don't know because Ohio State, I hate to say this, they just haven't been down for us to know for their fan base to get tested. But Nebraska has withstood the test of time in regards to just posting these 4 and 5 win seasons, and people still pack the stadium and still love the football program. It's just unmatched.
It is. It is. Especially, I live here in Arizona, and I can't tell you how many places. If I wear my Nebraska sweatshirt or T-shirt, I'm out anywhere, I will hear a Go Big Red in Arizona.
So you've probably, I'm sure you've shared this with your audience. So, but I'm curious. So in 2015, you didn't care anything about Nebraska football, and then all of a sudden,
No, no,
2016, you did, and you're in
that's not.
Arizona.
Yeah.
So
So
how did
I,
you become a
it just
Nebraska
so
fan?
I'm kind of just not even I wasn't even a football fan at all. And I just happened to be watching, like a game was on in the background, and I saw one of Nebraska's quarterback get hurt and get carted off the field in an ambulance. And everyone's just, the girlfriend's on the sidelines, and she's like, and everyone's just like watching. Like, I couldn't, it's like watching a car wreck. How could I, how could I not watch? And the quarterback ended up coming back to the game, thankfully. And even though the team didn't win, I just thought it was really very heroic how they continued to play and kind of, dug in even deeper for their teammate, their injured teammate, because everybody was concerned. But they continued to play with so much rigor that I loved it. I thought, now that is cool. That is something I can get behind. It reminds me of the same reason that 18-year-olds sign up to go into the armed service. You want to be part of something bigger than yourself.
That's what made you a Nebraska fan.
It is.
Wow.
Random. I know. Random.
Huh. I just figured it was going to be, oh, my dad or this person
Nope.
or that person or.
Nope. Yeah. It's just like that. So what
So
can
you
I
could have
say?
flipped on some other game where a guy got carted off the field and you would be a
I
North Carolina
doubt it,
State
because
fan now or something.
I've been to many a game in my life, and none of them have ever caught my eye. None of them have ever made me stop and watch. So once I was in, I was in. I don't do anything halfway. I
All
know.
right.
Uh,
And
yeah.
and you've
I
suffered
wish I
through
had,
many Saturdays because of it.
yes. And I wish I had more of a story like yours, where you just lived it since you were 8 years old.
I like
But
your story better.
we could trade. Joe Lakis says the start of the NCAA demise was in '96 when ABC got the NCAA to reverse the sanctions they imposed on Nebraska. Okay.
That's a good point. Um, I think the NCAA started to lose power about 10 years before that when they used to control the TV contracts. And Georgia and Oklahoma actually um, fought against. There used to be all sorts of crazy NCAA rules about TV and how many times you could be on TV and when you could be on TV. And Oklahoma and Georgia, they basically broke from everyone else and said, we're not going to be subjected to that. And the NCAA, because of the power of those two brands, basically conceded. And I think that showed some things as well.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay. And Ted Hilker says, normally I don't enjoy the postseason when we're out, but the playoffs was pretty fun to watch, in my opinion. It was. It actually was. It continued to give us more football to look forward to. That is really the best part about it. Um, and we were familiar with so many of the teams that got to play. Yeah. And then Pitt Snipe Husker says, concur, Ted. I enjoyed the playoffs. So I guess, we're going to continue to have more of those many game playoffs.
Yeah, they're only going to increase. Anytime somebody says, well, they should knock it down to 8. Yeah, if we're just giving our opinion, I'm right there with you. But if we're talking about what's going to happen in reality, I have a guy that calls me all the time, and he's a bit detached from reality. But anyway, I have to just basically reiterate, the playoff will do nothing but expand because of money. They're not going to reduce the number of games. That has never happened. They only increase the number of games because they can make more money.
That is so right. I tell you, it is all about the money wheel. And I don't know how things are going to shake out necessarily, having to do with uh, revenue sharing, what that's going to look like. But that's going to be a whole nother like thing. I can't wait to get some information so we can have those conversations.
And when you were talking about fairness a few minutes ago and bringing up that issue with how much money different schools have,
Mm-hmm.
if NIL did not exist, then that could have been our answer was, okay, even though it doesn't sit well with a lot of people to be paying student athletes, let's understand they do generate billions of dollars. So let's compensate them. And there's a figure that's around 20 or $22 million that's being thrown out there that is going to be the distribution for all these schools based on the media rights contracts, and that's what's going to go. Well, if that was all there was to it, if this was the NFL and they got a salary cap,
Mm-hmm.
well, they run a business. This is another thing that's wrong with college football is the SEC acts in its own interest. The Big Ten acts in their own interests. Everybody acts in their own interests. Well, that's not the way the NFL works. The NFL makes decisions because we're all in this together. We're what's good for you is good for us. And the NFC East doesn't do something different than the AFC North. They work together. And the salary cap is tied to a formula that determines, okay, our profits went up 300 million this year. Well, the salary cap is going to go up that percentage. We lost money this year. The salary cap's it's all tied together. Well, we're in a system where, yeah, that 22 million or whatever the figure is going to be is going to be given as an opportunity to be equal across the board, but there's still this NIL factor, and you cannot restrict donors, boosters, outside companies to give these athletes what are basically endorsements without them having to do the endorsement, just gifts. And so the bigger brands with the bigger alumni bases that are more invested in football and have the reserves are still going to add to that 20 million with more money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that can't be controlled. We live in a free market system. So I believe and I defend the right of the athlete to make money. If there are 15-year-olds on TikTok making stupid videos and they can make a boatload of money, why can't an athlete who actually lifts weights and goes to practice and so forth? So as an individual right, I agree with it, but I think it's been to the detriment of the sport. And I think we're going to see a story that's going to repeat itself over and over and over, where there's going to be these athletes that think they're good enough to go to the NFL and make a couple $100,000 a year in college and think that that's a fortune because they've never had money. They're going to blow it. They're not going to go to the NFL, and they're going to be not in a great spot when they're 28, 30 years old because they've got no skill outside of playing football, and they didn't know how to handle their money, and they thought it was more than it was. And I think that story is going to repeat itself.
Well, it already has. That's taken place. There's so many ex-players that have gone to the NFL that have lost it all. I mean, that's just what has happened. And thankfully, Nebraska does educate their players pretty well on those types of things. But I think there should be some sort of fund for those ex-players. I mean, just recently we had a player die in his basement because he had like carbon monoxide poisoning because he couldn't turn on the heat or something like that in his basement. Like it just things like that that so upset me because here they've given something very precious to fans and they're not being taken care of. So I hope that somebody does do something about that. in
Yeah.
particular. But, you know, I've taken up most of your night, and I just wanted to thank you so much for coming on and talking about all of these things. Some of the things aren't in your book, but most of them are. And I should tell people because they won't be surprised. But you guys look like there's all kinds of highlighted stuff. This is a Bible for the 90s. It's really good. And I got mine on Amazon. I think it was like 9.99. It came in like 24 hours. Really good. Good read. If you're going anywhere, summer read, whatever, just to have in your on your bookshelf.
Well, thank you. I
Yeah,
appreciate the endorsement.
of course. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I hope you write more.
Yeah, I would like to. I enjoyed doing this. I
Good.
did. It's my first book, but I would like to write more.
Good. Yeah, it seems like you have a lot of knowledge that you could definitely share.
It was fun to talk Nebraska football and college football for the last hour or whatever it's been. And I will let people know that you're here with this show on Corn Nation. And thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming. And I want everyone here to know that you are part of the community and your voices matter. And I hope you feel heard. Until the next time, I hope you have a great week and go Big Red.